My heart stopped beating for 14 seconds in the cardiac unit. When consciousness returned, the doctor asked if I wanted them to contact my family. He had no idea they were skiing in Aspen. I discovered this from a hastily scribbled note they would left on my nightstand. Emergency trip, back in 10 days, praying you recover quickly. So I waited in that sterile room, counting ceiling tiles and listening to machines. Beep, I recovered in complete solitude. Then I liquidated everything, emptied every account, and vanished without a trace. When they returned from their powder runs, I had already become a ghost. Before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. And I am curious, what is the most important lesson about family loyalty you would want to share? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for being here. The first sensation I recall was the terrifying silence when my heart monitor went flat, followed by the burning sensation as they jolted electricity through my chest to bring me back from wherever I would gone. I couldn't tell if it was Tuesday or Saturday, but every muscle in my body screamed with pain, and my throat felt like sandpaper wrapped around broken glass. The cardiologist's badge read Dr. Martinez, and behind his wire-rimmed glasses were the most compassionate eyes I would seen in months. But that morning, his expression carried something I hadn't expected. Surprise, as if my awakening had caught the entire medical staff off guard. I attempted to ask about my son and daughter, and all he managed was, "Please rest now, Mrs. Henderson. Focus on healing." But later that evening, after the nursing shift changed, I overheard him speaking quietly on his cell phone just outside my room. I wasn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words floated through the thin walls anyway. "Yes, she is stabilized completely. Absolutely. She is alert and asking questions. Would you prefer to speak with her directly?" A long pause followed. "I understand, of course. I simply thought you would want to be informed immediately." I lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, trying to comprehend that my own son had declined to take the call. The crushing sensation in my chest felt worse than when the heart attack had initially struck. I remained in the cardiac intensive care unit for 9 days. No visitors appeared, no flower arrangements arrived, no phone calls came through, nothing but the steady rhythm of machines and the occasional kind word from overworked nurses. When the discharge papers were finally ready, Dr. Martinez was the only person who offered to escort me to the lobby, and he seemed genuinely uncomfortable about the whole situation. I left the hospital in a medical transport van and had to sit on my own front porch for 30 minutes because the spare key I would hidden under the garden gnome had disappeared. Someone had deliberately removed it. When the front door eventually opened, it wasn't my son Marcus or my daughter, Jennifer. Instead, it was Todd, my son-in-law, holding a smoothie and looking absolutely shocked to see me standing there so soon. He mumbled something about weather delays and how they would plan to visit me the following afternoon to see how I was managing. But the moment I stepped inside, everything felt wrong. Furniture had been relocated, rooms were partially repainted, and my anniversary photos with Harold were stacked in cardboard boxes like unwanted clutter. Spread across the dining room table was a real estate listing with a photo of my house prominently displayed, classic Midwestern farmhouse, perfect for growing families. I had never consented to any sale. I had never signed any documents giving permission. That is when I noticed the manila folder lying open on the kitchen island, power of attorney documentation. My signature was there, dated 18 months earlier when I would had my gallbladder surgery, and they would assured me it was simply a standard precaution in case something went wrong during the procedure. Apparently, they had activated it while I was unconscious to begin the process of liquidating my entire life. I collapsed into the nearest chair because my legs suddenly felt like they couldn't support my weight. And I have no idea how long I sat there in stunned silence. Eventually, I reached for Marcus's old laptop that was charging near the breakfast nook. It still functioned, and apparently he would forgotten to sign out of his text messages. That is how I discovered the rest of their plan. House listing goes live Wednesday. If she is not discharged by then, we will begin the memory care facility paperwork. Let's face it, Mom was always terrible at accepting help gracefully. That is what Jennifer had typed. My own daughter, discussing me, like I was a troublesome project they were behind schedule on. They were attempting to erase my existence as if I were simply another item on their never-ending to-do list. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't raise my voice or throw anything. I simply stood up, walked to the kitchen pantry, and retrieved the metal tin where I would been keeping emergency cash for the past decade. Then I pulled out the spiral notebook I would use to record important passwords and account information since the early days of the internet. Because if they assumed I was dead weight, if they believed I would simply sit there passively while they shipped me off to a nursing facility and divided up my possessions like they were conducting a garage sale, they had forgotten exactly who had raised them to be functional adults in the first place. The following morning, I waited until Todd left for whatever fabricated appointment he would scheduled. Then I walked directly into what used to be called the sewing room, but which had now been transformed into some kind of sorting station. Half of my wardrobe was folded neatly on the daybed, some pieces already sealed in plastic donation bags, and my jewelry box sat empty on the dresser. They hadn't even bothered asking what I might want to keep for myself. That is when the full reality hit me with crushing force. This wasn't some misunderstanding or communication breakdown. They weren't preparing to help me recover and regain my independence. They were systematically preparing to eliminate me from my own life. I grabbed the laptop again and found additional text messages that painted an even clearer picture. Todd had sent a message to Jennifer from the Denver airport. "Once your mom's property sells, we will finally have some financial breathing room." Financial breathing room? From what exactly? From the woman who had worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years after Harold died. From the person who had co-signed their student loans when the bank initially refused them. From the grandmother who had provided free childcare every summer while they took romantic getaways to Europe. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened the manila folder once again, and this time examined the power of attorney paperwork with much greater attention to detail. The document they would activated wasn't the limited version I remembered signing. It was a comprehensive one, notarized during my gallbladder surgery when Jennifer had rushed me through the paperwork while I was still groggy from anesthesia, telling me it was required by the insurance company. I remembered scrawling my signature while half-conscious and assuming it was just another piece of hospital bureaucracy. Now, it was being weaponized to dismantle everything I would built over 7 decades. I immediately called the attorney who had handled Harold's estate, Robert Chen, a brilliant young man who had started his own practice after working for a large firm downtown. I explained the entire situation to him without leaving out a single detail. He listened with professional silence and then said, "You are unfortunately not the first person to experience this, Margaret, but we absolutely can challenge this legally." He asked me to come to his office immediately, helped me review every page of the documentation, and confirmed what I had desperately hoped to hear. The power of attorney they would filed didn't actually extend to real estate transactions without my explicit written consent for each individual sale. "They are overstepping their legal authority," he explained. "If you act quickly, you can completely reverse this situation and regain full control." And that is exactly what I did. I had Robert file the necessary paperwork to rescind the power of attorney immediately, restore my complete legal autonomy, and we began preparing to list the house for sale under my name exclusively. I didn't want to fight to keep the house anymore. I wanted to liquidate it before they had the chance to. That night, I stood in the doorway of the family room where Harold and I used to watch the evening news together, looked at the faint marks on the hardwood floor where our recliner had sat for 20 years, and told myself this would be the final time I would allow myself to feel sentimental about this place. I wasn't just leaving the house behind. I was abandoning the illusion that Marcus and Jennifer were still the loving children I would raise. They weren't anymore. They had become strangers wearing familiar faces, and the most dangerous part of the whole situation was that they had assumed I didn't possess the strength or determination to walk away first. I didn't waste precious time trying to confront them directly. There was no point in screaming at people who had already decided not to listen, and I refused to sit around waiting to be packaged up like an unwanted piece of furniture they were trying to get rid of. Robert moved with impressive efficiency. Within 4 days, We had the house officially relisted under my name exclusively, and the sale was being managed entirely under my direction. I had the locks changed first, then left Todd a voicemail informing him to collect his golf clubs from the garage before I donated them to charity. He didn't even attempt to argue or ask questions, just showed up silently, grabbed his belongings, and left without making eye contact. I didn't tell anyone where I was planning to go, not even Robert. I sold everything except the photographs that held genuine meaning: Harold's wedding ring and military medals, and a small box of artwork my grandchildren had created back when they still remembered how to show affection. The house sold in 13 days to a cash buyer with no contingencies attached. I walked into the bank and closed every single account that Marcus or Jennifer had access to, then opened completely new accounts at a different bank under a slight variation of my legal name, Margaret Rose Hamilton, using my mother's maiden name. I converted most of the money into certified checks and kept several $1,000s in cash secured in a locked travel pouch that I kept hidden under the passenger seat of my Honda. My car was the last possession I decided to keep. Nobody pays attention to a beige Honda Accord with Minnesota plates, and that anonymity was exactly what I needed. The night before my departure, I sat in my empty living room on a folding chair I would borrowed from the garage, ate a bologna sandwich off a paper napkin, and wrote 2 separate letters, one addressed to each of my children. I didn't fill them with accusations or bitter recriminations. Not directly anyway. I simply wrote, "You have shown me exactly who you really are. Thank you for making it so clear." Then I left both letters on the kitchen counter, disconnected the refrigerator, and removed the spare house key from under the garden gnome in the front yard. I was driving north on Highway 35 before sunrise, heading toward Wisconsin with no GPS guidance, no predetermined destination, and nobody in the world keeping track of my whereabouts, except me. I wasn't running away from anything. I was deliberately removing myself from a toxic situation. There is an important difference between those two actions. They had wanted a life that didn't include me. Now they were going to experience exactly what they would requested. By the time I crossed the Wisconsin state line, I would burn through most of a tank of gas, consumed 3 truck stop coffees, and processed whatever remaining grief I would been carrying about leaving Minnesota behind. And when I pulled into a small town called Millerville, population barely worth mentioning, I felt something resembling genuine peace for the first time in months. I chose it completely at random based on a highway sign that advertised Millerville Community Center, voted most welcoming in northern Wisconsin. That seemed like enough of a recommendation for me. I checked into a modest roadside motel, paid cash for an entire week up front, and introduced myself to the desk clerk as Margaret Hamilton, retired school nurse from Des Moines, Iowa, recently widowed, with no children, looking for a quiet place to start over. That became my official story. And the most unsettling part was how effortlessly I slipped into this new identity, how nobody questioned any detail of my background. Because in a community that small, people assume you are escaping from something, and they respect you more for having the courage to do it. I found a small apartment for rent above an antique shop, completely furnished. $650 per month. No lease required if I paid 3 months in advance with cash. The woman who showed it to me, Carol, asked only one question. "Do you have any pets?" Which I didn't. And that was the entire application process. I bought groceries from the local market, applied for a library card under my new name, and started volunteering there 3 mornings a week, helping with their literacy program for adult learners. Within 2 weeks, I was a recognized face around town. The soft-spoken lady with the slight Minnesota accent and gentle manner who always remembered to ask about your family members by name. That is where I met Patricia, a 31-year-old single mother with exhausted eyes and a 5-year-old son named Daniel, who attached himself to me like I was the missing piece of his world. Daniel started calling me Grandma Maggie after our 3rd meeting, and I didn't see any reason to correct him. I helped Patricia with babysitting occasionally, told her I would been a pediatric nurse for most of my career, and helped Daniel learn to read chapter books that were above his grade level. Gradually, the days became easier and more meaningful. I kept a small journal hidden in my nightstand where I recorded every fabricated detail about my background. just in case I needed to remember which version of my story I would told to whom. No children back in Iowa. No family members in Minnesota. No Marcus, no Jennifer. Just Margaret and her peaceful little apartment overlooking the town square. But late at night, when I was completely alone, I would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat. Not because I was afraid of being discovered, but because I was terrified that someone would eventually knock on my door and speak my real name out loud, shattering the careful illusion I would constructed. I wasn't mourning my old life anymore. I was actively hiding from it, and even though nobody had come looking for me yet, I knew that eventually someone would track me down. Back in Minnesota, the moment my children stepped off their return flight and drove to what they expected would be their inheritance management headquarters, everything collapsed simultaneously. Marcus called my old phone number first, and when it went directly to a disconnected message, he sent a text to the number they would had on file. "Hey Mom, we are back from Colorado. Can we stop by tomorrow morning to discuss the transition plans?" I obviously didn't respond to that message. By the time they noticed that the locks had been changed, the real estate sign had vanished, and the mailbox was overflowing with final notices and bank account closure confirmations. Genuine panic began to set in. Jennifer tried calling Robert Chen's office, and he very professionally informed her that he was no longer authorized to discuss my legal affairs with anyone. When she appeared at his office building demanding answers, the receptionist wouldn't even allow her past the lobby. Todd went around to the back of the house and tried to peer through the windows to see if any of my belongings were still inside. But the entire house was completely empty. No furniture, no personal items, not even a picture hanging on any wall. That same evening, they contacted the local police department and filed an official missing persons report. But the detective assigned to investigate wasn't particularly impressed with their sense of urgency, especially after Todd inadvertently mentioned that they had gone skiing in Colorado while I was fighting for my life in the cardiac intensive care unit. Even worse, he admitted they hadn't visited me a single time during my 9-day hospital stay. Within 72 hours, the story had leaked beyond official channels. First, through Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor who had always disapproved of Jennifer's entitled attitude, and then through a local Facebook community group where someone posted, "Does anyone know what happened to Margaret Henderson? Her family put her house up for sale while she was in the hospital recovering from a heart attack." The comment section absolutely exploded with outrage. One user managed to screenshot the original real estate listing with the sale date and cross-referenced it with my public hospital admission records. This woman was literally fighting for her life, and they were on vacation. The anger wasn't limited to social media platforms. It quickly became real-world consequences. A local television reporter showed up on Jennifer's front lawn with a camera crew. Then a larger media outlet picked up the story as a human interest scandal involving elder abuse, and suddenly Marcus, who had always prided himself on being a respected member of the community, was being confronted in the grocery store parking lot by people calling him a disgrace to his family name. Jennifer attempted to salvage the situation by crying her way through a televised interview, saying, "We honestly thought she was going to be fine. We never imagined she would just disappear like this." But viewers weren't buying her performance. The interview segment was reposted on social media with sarcastic commentary about her fake tears, captioned with ski trip vultures and footage of people enjoying themselves on snowy mountain slopes. People were tagging television talk show hosts, demanding investigations into elder financial abuse, researching Todd's previous business failures, and speculating that maybe I hadn't disappeared at all. Maybe I had finally gotten smart enough to protect myself. The more they panicked and tried to control the narrative, the more completely silent I remained, tucked away in my quiet Wisconsin apartment, following it all unfold on Patricia's laptop computer when she was at work, reading the comments calling me a hero. A legend, Grandma gone rogue. I didn't feel triumphant about their public humiliation. I felt genuinely safe for the first time in years. I felt invisible in the best possible way. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I didn't owe anyone an explanation or apology for anything. It had been nearly 3 months since I would left Minnesota, and I was beginning to believe that perhaps the world had genuinely moved on without me. The media attention had died down completely. My name hadn't appeared in any news stories for weeks, and I would settled into a comfortable routine that didn't involve constantly checking over my shoulder for familiar faces. I spent most mornings at the library and most afternoons helping Patricia manage her work schedule by watching Daniel, who had completely adopted me as his honorary grandmother without any hesitation. When his 6th birthday arrived, I helped bake a chocolate cake and hang decorations in the small community center next to the post office where Patricia had rented space for his party. Nothing elaborate, just colorful streamers, homemade pizza, and a folding table covered with mismatched paper plates and plastic cups. But it was absolutely perfect in every way that mattered. Daniel insisted I sit right next to him while he opened his presents, and when someone handed me a party hat with cartoon dinosaurs on it, I put it on without a moment's hesitation. One of the other mothers, young and energetic, always documenting everything, started recording Daniel opening his gifts, just a brief video for her personal social media. Nothing that seemed significant, except I was visible in the background the entire time, smiling, helping him read gift cards, even assisting him with the ribbon on a particularly stubborn package. It seemed completely harmless at the time. But 4 days later, while I was organizing returned books at the library, Patricia rushed in with her phone shaking in her hands, saying, "Margaret, you absolutely have to see this right now." The birthday party video had been shared by a parenting blog, then picked up by a social media account that specialized in cross-referencing current footage with old news stories from around the country. The caption was devastating. "Found her. Missing grandmother is alive and thriving in Wisconsin. She changed her identity. She has got a new family, and honestly, we are even more impressed with her now." I felt my stomach drop toward my feet. Comments were flooding and faster than I could read them. Some people were praising me, calling it the most brilliant escape plan they would ever seen. Others were attacking me for abandoning my real family, as if I were the villain in this story. My face was suddenly everywhere again on the internet. And worse than the exposure, my exact location had been revealed. The video had tagged the town name and even the community center where the party had been held. I sat down heavily on the floor, behind the reference desk. My heart pounding exactly like it had when I was lying in that hospital bed, helpless and connected to machines. I didn't understand. Patricia knelt down beside me and said, "What is happening here? Who are these people?" I looked directly into her eyes and told her the complete truth for the first time since I would arrived in Wisconsin. My name isn't Margaret Hamilton, it is Margaret Henderson, and I didn't run away from a family. I escaped from one that was trying to destroy me. She didn't ask for more details, didn't judge me, didn't demand explanations. She just nodded and said, "Okay, so what do we need to do now?" That is when I realized I would have to stop hiding very soon. Not because I wanted to emerge from my new life, but because once again, someone was coming to find me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Not because I was afraid of what might happen, but because I knew exactly what was coming next, and I didn't want to waste a single second pretending I was still safe in my anonymous little apartment. By the following morning, the video had accumulated over 2 million views, and I would been mentioned in so many new conspiracy theories that people were actually speculating I had faked my heart attack just to orchestrate some elaborate revenge scheme. It is fascinating how quickly the world can transform you from victim to villain the moment you take control of your own story. I disconnected the internet, deleted the browser history, and packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags, just in case I needed to disappear again immediately. But before I could even begin to figure out where I might go next, I spotted the familiar blue Honda with Minnesota license plates, cruising slowly past the library parking lot like a predator circling its prey. I knew it was Marcus before I could even see his face clearly. Something about the way he parked with mathematical precision, like he was still trying to follow all the rules perfectly. He emerged wearing khakis and a polo shirt, like we were meeting for a casual lunch, instead of after months of public scandal and family destruction. Then, he stood by the library entrance, holding a coffee cup and looking like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. I watched him from behind the biography section for several minutes before deciding to step outside and face whatever conversation was about to happen. When I finally appeared, he didn't speak immediately, just stared at me like he was trying to confirm I was actually real and not some figment of his guilty imagination. Then he said, "Mom, please don't walk away from me again." His voice broke slightly on the word mom, and I felt the old instinct to comfort him rising up like a reflex I hadn't completely eliminated yet. But I didn't move toward him. He stepped closer, looking desperate and exhausted. "You are not gone forever. You are not finished with us. You can come home now." I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I already attended my own funeral. You just decided not to show up for it." He flinched like I would physically struck him across the face. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, try to justify their behavior, blame Todd or Jennifer, or the timing or the doctors, or whatever convenient excuse he would rehearse during the drive from Minnesota. But he didn't attempt any of that. He just stood there holding that coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "We didn't understand," he whispered. "We thought we were being responsible, making practical decisions." I laughed out loud, harsh and bitter. The kind of laugh that communicates you don't get to rewrite history. "You left me alone in a hospital to die," I said clearly. "And when I survived, you tried to package me up like unwanted furniture and ship me off to a nursing home. Don't tell me you didn't understand. You understood exactly what you were doing." He started crying then. Quiet and tense, like he was trying to keep his breakdown from being witnessed by anyone else. I let him stand there in his misery for a long moment before I said, "I am not coming back to Minnesota, Marcus. I have built a new life here, a better one that doesn't require me to pretend we were ever a functional family." Then I turned around and walked away, not dramatically, not hurriedly, just deliberately enough to communicate that this wasn't a performance or negotiation. It was closure, the kind he had never bothered to give me. 5 days after Marcus returned to Minnesota empty-handed, a plain white envelope appeared in the library's mail slot addressed to Margaret Hamilton in handwriting. I recognized immediately as Jennifer's, despite not having seen it in several years. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 nights, untouched, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to read more desperate apologies or if I should just burn the entire thing without looking. When I finally tore it open, there wasn't a letter from her inside. There was one from me, written in my own shaky handwriting, composed while I was still in the cardiac intensive care unit because I didn't think I was going to survive. I had written it for them, just in case. "If I don't make it through this," it began, "please know that I have already forgiven both of you for everything, but if I do survive, please come see me. I am frightened, and I need you." I remembered every single word the moment I saw it again. I had asked Dr. Martinez to make sure one of the nurses passed it along to my family if they eventually showed up to visit. He told me later that he would tuck it into my personal belongings bag when nobody ever came to claim it. I guess they discovered it while going through my things after I would disappeared. Jennifer must have read it after seeing me in Wisconsin, and now here it was again. In my hands like a ghost from my most vulnerable moment. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't break down or feel overwhelmed with regret. I read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and slid it into the journal where I kept every fabricated detail about my new identity, right next to the page where I would written "No contact equals peace." The next morning, Jennifer sent an email to the library's general address. I don't know how she obtained that information, but her message was brief and direct. "I would like to visit, just once. No Todd, no cameras, no drama, just me, if you will allow it." I stared at the computer screen for a long time, debating whether to respond at all, but something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness, typed back, "One visit, that is all. Bring the letter with you." I didn't know what I expected from this meeting. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe just the opportunity to look at her face when she realized I wasn't the fragile, predictable mother she would abandoned, but a woman who had buried her old life and constructed something they had never helped build. When Patricia came home from work that evening, I told her Jennifer was planning to visit, and she didn't say much in response, just nodded thoughtfully and asked if I wanted her to be present during the conversation. I told her, no, this particular confrontation was mine to finish alone. Jennifer arrived on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, dressed like she was attending a business meeting. Navy blazer, pressed slacks, heels completely inappropriate for gravel walkways, and a nervous energy that made her keep checking her phone even though she had nowhere else she needed to be. We met at the small park near the lake, the one I would walked past countless times but never actually entered, and I chose that location for a specific reason. It was neutral territory, peaceful, and nobody tells lies when they are sitting near water that reflects everything honestly. I was already sitting on the wooden bench overlooking the lake when she walked up, clutching a leather purse like it was protective armor. And for just a moment, I could see the little girl she used to be, the one who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms when she was afraid of the lightning. She didn't say hello or make small talk, just handed me the envelope containing my ICU letter and sat down several feet away on the same bench, leaving space between us like she thought I might suddenly become violent. I opened the envelope and looked at my desperate letter again, this time noticing that she would written responses in the margins with blue ink, her own comments scribbled next to each line I would written when I thought I was dying. We didn't know it was that critical. I thought Marcus would handle visiting. I am so sorry, Mom. I was terrified of watching you become weak. She looked down at her manicured hands and whispered, I didn't know how to process seeing you vulnerable and helpless. I let the silence stretch between us until it became almost unbearable. Then said, I didn't need you to be strong for me. I needed you to simply show up and hold my hand. She nodded, like she would already told herself that same thing hundreds of times. Do you think I don't hate myself for this? She asked. Do you think I sleep peacefully at night? I turned to face her directly and replied, I think you sleep better than I did wondering why my own children couldn't be bothered to sit beside my hospital bed while I fought for my life. She started crying then. Genuine crying, not strategic or manipulative, just raw, embarrassed, sobbing into her sleeve, like she was trying to muffle the sound so it wouldn't disturb the ducks on the lake. We were selfish and short-sighted, she said. We thought there would be more time to make it right. I looked out at the water and said quietly, that is what everyone thinks until time runs out. I didn't forgive her in that moment, not verbally, not internally, but I didn't scream at her either. I just told her the truth without any cushioning. You and Marcus are adults who made a conscious decision. You don't get to reframe that now, just because other people saw how it looked from the outside. She asked if she could visit again sometime. I said no. She asked if she could send letters occasionally. I said she could mail them to Patricia's address, but I wouldn't promise to read them. When we both stood up to leave, she reached toward me for a hug, and I stepped back. Not aggressively, just firmly. That part of our relationship, I said, you already buried. And this time, I got to choose the funeral arrangements. The next morning, I sat at the small table in my apartment with a fresh piece of notebook paper, the same kind I would use to track my false identity details and password information. And I wrote one final letter, not to Marcus, not to Jennifer, not even to Harold's memory, but to myself. You accomplished it, I wrote at the top, in clear letters. Simple and absolutely true. You got yourself out. I made a list of everything I would left behind. A house that had become cold and unwelcoming, a name that carried too much painful history, and children who believed that shared DNA guaranteed unconditional loyalty regardless of how they treated me. Then I listed everything I would gain. Quiet mornings without drama, authentic conversations with people who valued my presence, a child's laughter that didn't come with hidden expectations, and a woman named Patricia who appreciated what I brought into her world rather than resenting what I had once given to people who didn't deserve it. I folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote on the front in large letters, Margaret Hamilton, keep forever. It went into a shoebox under my bed, along with Daniel's drawings and the single photograph I would kept of Marcus and Jennifer, taken many years ago before they learned what the word inheritance meant. That afternoon, I helped Patricia plant flower bulbs in the small garden behind her apartment building, and when Daniel ran up with a smooth river stone yelling, "Grandma Maggie, look what I found by the water," I didn't hesitate or feel conflicted about the name. I just smiled genuinely and said, "That is beautiful. Sweetheart, let's find the perfect place to display it." We spent an hour arranging stones and laughing together, not because everything had been healed or resolved, but because I finally understood that I didn't need to heal from anything to feel completely whole again. I didn't check the news websites. I didn't open any more mail from Minnesota. I didn't wonder if another letter would eventually arrive. The story they tell about me now in newspaper articles and social media posts isn't mine to control anymore. It belongs to them to spin and to the world to judge. But here, in this small Wisconsin town with no complicated history and no unrealistic expectations, I am not Margaret Henderson, the abandoned mother, or the scandalized grandmother who disappeared. I am simply Margaret. Just Margaret. And this time, I am the only person who gets to decide who has the privilege of calling me anything else.